Rupa, welcome to the Creation for Liberation podcast. So excited to have you here.
Thank you.
So, just jumping right into it, I'm so curious to know more about the origins of you. And I'd love to know, how was art and activism present and prioritized in your upbringing, if you don't mind sharing?
Was it prioritized? I don't think it was prioritized by my grandmother, I would say. I was born and raised here in unceded Ohlone territories in what is now called Mountain View. And my parents were Punjabi immigrants, and my grandmother was an amazing singer and an amazing artist, but never really had a chance to live that reality. She just was untrained and just incredibly talented. So like she could sit at a piano and just hear a melody and completely, get it out. And her voice was really beautiful, and her artistry with sculpture was just. She was again not trained, but just had some innate skills. And she was an interesting person. I remember being a young person in India with her in the marketplace, and she would be walking in the marketplace and someone would try to like grab her or, feel her. And she would literally stop everything and like raise her voice and say, how dare you? I'm here with my grandchildren, and don't I deserve the right to walk here and without you doing this to me? And as a young, like a 4 or 5 year old, I was like mortally embarrassed by my grandmother. Like, oh my God, what is she doing? She's making a scene. But then as I grew up, I was like, oh, she was asserting her right to be in this place where women actually don't go. Like there weren't very many women in that marketplace. And she wanted to go and choose her vegetables herself and be involved in, bringing things for her home. And she wanted to take her grandchildren, and she wanted to do that in a way that wouldn't compromise her dignity. So I feel like it was my grandmother who was a big part of that, and then my own father. So I grew up here, and our children, like my childhood consisted of, our family driving around in our VW van when we were kids, all over the Western United States. And my father would often stop at places and talk about the history of colonization. Because when he came to the United States, he came to New Mexico where he studied electrical engineering. And he was really shocked to see what had happened here compared to what had happened in India. So colonization of India by Britain was brutal, but the culture was still intact. The people were still there in their homelands. Whereas the genocide of European expansion in what is now called the United States really struck my dad. So he would, stop at these reservations and these places and invite us to go out and talk to people. And this is when I was like 8 years old or 9 years old, and I would just be absorbing what my father had said. So did he know that he was creating a person who would be engaged with this work in my later years? Probably not. Did he know that that would shape so much of my own political understanding and questioning? Probably not, but it definitely did.
Mm. That's really beautiful. I'm seeing and feeling so much similarity and also difference just in what you shared about your grandmother and your father. Me, and my grandmother, Premila Ma, she also was like, is such a gifted singer, musician, composer of like prayerful devotional music. And she thrives and exists in a small community in South Africa where she lives, in service to that specific community. But she holds a lot of shame around not having had an education by way of, school and institutional education. But she's so gifted in that, and it is her superpower in a way without her realizing it. At the same time, being an immigrant or a child of immigrants and an immigrant myself, like I didn't find my dad operating in that way. It was more of a find your place, do what you can there, and try not to disrupt anything or venture out of what's known. So, are you still making music
I
consistently?
haven't I haven't made music in 3 years since the pandemic started. So for me, The act of writing music is it comes from a place of being very still and not in the process of like active process of grieving. And I'm definitely grieving the 20 million people who have left planet Earth since the last 3 years. That experience for me has been uh, a very intense experience as a frontline physician, as a front, like being in the hospital, listening to the high flow oxygen, the sounds of people struggling to breathe during COVID has been really hard. And to also experience the workplace dynamics as a doctor and to see how disposable the workforce was and is. That experience has been just kind of foundational rocking for me. And that's not the place that I write music. I don't write music in those times. Those are times of like experience, and then there's integration, and then music comes. So it's a fallow period for me. And there's been an interesting, pulsation of understanding what the song is, understanding how the work that we're doing on these farms is also part of a song, a longer song, a 252-year song cycle, starting to hear and understand the various voices that are together in song and chorus in different kinds of compositions. So I will say though, when you say, was art and activism, how was it supported? It was actually not supported. And then just to say, being someone who was raised by my parents, who, even though my mom was a prolific pianist herself and was, admitted to the Royal College of Music, ended up having an arranged marriage to my dad, coming here instead to the United States, and not playing music at all. Until I was like 8 years old and she got a piano, but even then she didn't pursue music as in her life. That music and theater and creative outlets were not encouraged when I was young. It was actually discouraged, that I had to do, either be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, like these professional tracks. And so sometimes when I think to myself, like as far as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be a doctor, like to be in service. I love science. I love biological science. I love living systems. But it's, that was the career that was okay for my parents. But the getting on stage, getting out in front of groups and saying, let's shut that toxic waste thing down, like these kinds of ways of engaging the society were not things that were encouraged in my family at all, like directly.
Yeah, yet here you are as not only a doctor and also having had quite a career as a musician, and also a musician with so much meaning and purpose toward collective liberation. And I just am curious to know how you make meaning of understanding how that spirit still came through for you, even with that being discouraged, specifically your music life.
It was just something that had to happen, and I can't really imagine a life without having my guitar and my like just composition. That's been such an integrated part of my life. So these periods where when my father died in 2001, I was silent for 3 years. I didn't write a single lyric or anything. It reminds me of this time right now. It's like because something so foundational is changing in me that all I can do is be still and wait. And that's what it feels like right now, which is interesting because that was 20 years ago. And so I've the artistic process, which is one of inquiry and sitting at the edge of things that are not known and being open to receiving and listening, and integrating and expressing. That's just a part of who I have always been. And it just feels like myself, in the same way as being a physician, like, to be a doctor or to be a healer, involves those same things. You sit at the edge of the unknown. You work in accompaniment with people, and do your best to sit and listen and integrate and express, so that something can move and heal. And that really is what kind of the nature of, I think, everything that I try to do has that quality to it. Same right now with this work we're doing with the Deep Medicine Circle. So we're doing this Landback work, And that is like a constantly evolving process. It's like, okay, how do we do that? Who should land go back to? How do we create the right partnerships that can help this? What does that mean even? When how do you do land back in the context of colonial capitalist architectures and arrangements of power and private property? What does that mean? Land back private property to some other person so that they can have their private property? Is that the extent of our imagination, right? And so those are the kinds of things that you realize that where art teaches you, just the act of being able to listen to the questions and to live the questions without answers sometimes, but to insist upon the living of the questions again and again. Because if we don't, we have tacitly accepted the system of violence that is destroying the earth, that is destroying people's ability to live well on the earth, and that is destroying other entities' capacity for survival. So when I see the sky turn orange in the Bay Area, in a place where I was born and raised, that I love and I feel such an obligation to care for, it's a holy shit moment, right? Where you have to live these questions, and that's part of the work that we're doing, and that's why we're bringing together, elders like Charlene Eigen Vasquez, who's an Ohlone tribal lawyer and culture builder, peacemaker, bridging person, and people like Walter Riley, who is the chair of our board and is an elder in political movements. That's why it's been so important to have these people there to discuss and to chew on and to interrogate and to look at how we do this work moving forward.
Mm. Yeah, this practice of living into the questions and finding some ease or some presence at the edge of the unknown feels like such a decolonizing practice in general. It feels like such a humble practice. Like I am humble to the mystery and that I don't have to have control over knowing what it is. And it's so challenging with highly thinking, analyzing, meaning making brains. How do you ground into this practice on a day-to-day basis? Like I definitely heard you say you see the orange sky and you have to come to this practice again of living into the questions. But how do you do this? How do you yourself do this on a daily basis when it feels so, I think, for the human mind to go into thinking and trying to have an answer?
I mean, I don't think I'm an expert at it, or I don't think I'm even good at it. But I think I'm committed to it. So I realize that everything in my life has the word practice. I'm practicing medicine. I'm practicing music. Like nothing in my life is like, I've perfected this thing. No, it's like a lifelong journey of learning how to unlearn, of learning how to be in relationship with our questions, with the trauma, with the, dynamics of healing, and healing itself is a process. It's an ongoing process. It's not a destination. It's not a place that you get to. It's like an onion peeling layers. It's a process. It's a lived process. And so when we become process oriented as opposed to objective oriented. So when we say land back, oh, is that just moving? Is that a real estate transaction? Okay, land back. Land's been returned back. Here's your new title. Is that land back? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's important. There's stages and steps and processes by which these things happen. Land back also involves reorienting ourselves as settlers on stolen land. So, what is my obligation in that process in land back? What is the obligation of Native communities who are getting land back? Those are their questions that they're asking. What does this even mean in this system of private property? So to hold sort of purity politics to any of these things and say, well, that's not this and this is not this. It's we don't really have time for that, because the sky is orange and the water's polluted and the children are getting cancer. So these are urgent times, and it requires a different kind of thinking and a different kind of being. And there will be people who will work to tear everything down, and make their cases for for any slight deviation from like a concept of purity. And then there are people who are working to build, and they're working to achieve very specific political aims, like feeding community, making sure everyone who's hungry has enough healthy food to eat. So that those are different approaches. And pardon me, for myself, I am committed to yeah, just living those practices and hearing where the need is, seeing where the need is, and acting there. And that's what kind of you do, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
So it's not, and it's not, again, a like one size fits all. It's something that's constantly evolving. Like,
Yeah.
you do it and you're like, okay, I got it. It's like, oh, we do it, we reevaluate, we do it again, do it again, do it again.
Yeah. I mean, something that's really stood out to me in what you just said around this, among other things, is that like being committed to it is enough. And you don't have to be good at it. You don't have to be an expert at it. It doesn't have to be a stagnant process or static process. That being committed to living into the questions is it. It is it. Um, I heard you mention, being in a space of grief right now with everything that has happened, especially over the last 3 years, how your creative energy is not necessarily flowing or being present with your music so much as it is in your other work. How do you make peace with the fallow period that naturally happens in any creative process?
Yeah, like when we stop arranging ourselves along the ideas of capitalist production, right? Like we stop seeing, I'm not a producer of music. I'm not there to simply provide products and more products and more products and more products. My music is a lived expression of me and my encounters and my experiences. So whether my music is a land-based project, how what I see my music, what I'm hearing and experiencing, whether it's songs that I want to share in community in different ways, um, whether it's something I play by myself for my own solace and healing. These are all things that are, you know, I don't, I've learned not to question it because it's a gift. And that's by that I mean, when we are offered a gift, we don't go, why can't I have more all the time? Right? We say thank you. And so that's where I do a lot of talking to the land. I do a lot of talking to the ocean. I feel all my songs come from the ocean. So I'll go to the ocean. Every time I go, I thank her. Thank you for my children. Thank you for my songs. Thank you for everything that you've given me. So that I'm acknowledging, okay, this is not me, Rupa, like doing these things. This is me being open and receptive to what I'm receiving and deciding to share. And so that's like a different place of situating the ego in terms of the work, and thinking of how to live life in relationship to these beings that are informing us, so that we can live our best life. I find that when I'm in relationship with the ocean on a regular basis, where I'm in relationship with the soil and the land or the trees or the beings who are immediately around me, then you hear music everywhere. I hear music everywhere. And I might not like write a song, but I'm definitely singing when I'm walking down the street. And so that's just what I do. That's just me. And it doesn't work really well for the music industry. It doesn't work well for my agents, but it works great for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Given that you are also a physician working, I understand, with patients, with people, yes. How do you integrate this practice of being in relationship with the land, with the ocean, into your art that is medicine, that is healing with folks?
Oh, it depends on the patients. It can be as easy as, just spending some time grounding with patients, asking them to become aware of where they are, like in the hospital. You have a vast view of the San Francisco Bay from like the 14th floor of UCSF, where I'm usually on that floor with patients, or some of the other floors I'm all over the hospital. But from that 14th floor, you have this incredible view of the Bay. So asking people to look at those mountains and look at the water, and to remember where they are, to take in that beauty, to take in that joy. But it also involves bringing people down to the farm and working with them on the farm, and getting people's hands in the dirt together, and yeah, discussing and understanding how we compost and heal our trauma, especially frontline healthcare workers. So we've done some really great sessions on healing of frontline healthcare workers.
Can you share a little bit more about that? Like how we compost and transform our trauma?
Well, trauma, so looking at, I feel like trauma is something that when I think of like a necklace, and there's beads on that necklace, and every trauma you experience kind of like becomes another bead. And it reawakens all the other ones that are on there. So it kind of triggers and re-inflames and awakens. And so when you have these traumatic experiences, like being a doctor on the front line of, or being a nurse of COVID, it is an opportunity to connect with all that other trauma and to process and heal it as best as we can. And it's challenging if you're in the midst of a pandemic and there's another wave, and you're being forced to have higher nursing ratios and not be effective at your work, and all the people who've left healthcare have left the ones of us who are there with less resources, so there's more burnout. So it's, while you're undergoing more impact from the pandemic, it's still important to stop and create some space to like digest and process. And the earth is a great way to connecting with the earth is a great way to do that, because trauma lives in our bodies and it's experienced in our cells of our bodies. And the earth has a tremendous capacity to receive all sorts of everything. And so that's something that we've done, from things as like making a giant compost pile together with the nurses on the land. One afternoon we did that, and it was so fun. It was so physically challenging, and then also to learn how to layer the lasagna layers of compost to make an effective compost pile, and then to watch it and to water it and to sit with it and to be like, okay, we just took all this rotten material and we're going to make something beautiful out of it. So there's that way in which soil and the earth teaches us and informs us that we too can be transformed, that grieving is a transformative process, that we become something that we don't yet know at the precipice of grieving until we've gone through it. And it's those liminal spaces that offer us a great deal of information and knowledge and wisdom in our lives, as we take trauma and allow it to move through us instead of hold on to us.
Yeah. I feel that, especially with earth being such a supreme composter of everything that is created on earth, including
Us.
All the violence and all the pain and all the joy and gratitude. Rupa, what is your vision for the evolution of I'm going to say healing, but more specifically medicine, and how we approach medicine, especially in this country?
I mean, like the practice of Western medicine?
Yes.
We need a billing strike. We need doctors and nurses to stop writing notes that can be billed for until collectively, until everyone can get Medicare for all. Not that that's the answer, but it's a critical thing, because people are going into crippling debt from their medical bills. Healthcare systems have made record profits in the last 3 years, while doctors and nurses have been crushed. And so, and it's completely inappropriate when we're there taking care of our communities. In the last week, when I was on service at the hospital, I had like 3 patients cry just by expressing their gratitude for us being there for caring for them. They just sobbed, like, thank you so much. They just couldn't stop crying. And that feeling of, will anyone be there to take care of me? Like that's really on people's minds. Or will the people be there who are effective at taking care of me? Will they be good? Who's left behind right now? And so the fact that those of us who are left behind are still contributing to the enrichment of highly unethical people who are making so much money off the death and illness of people and the exploitation of the labor force that's doing the actual caregiving. It's unacceptable. So I think the low bar is Medicare for all. The high bar is creating systems of care that are actually effective for treating the people we're treating, which isn't what I would call Western medicine right now.
Yeah. So when I first said medicine, how do you see medicine? What does that mean to you?
Medicine is everything that makes you feel good. That medicine is spending time with your friends and having a beautiful meal together. Medicine is going for a walk by the ocean and being in relationship with that incredible force of energy and that air. Medicine is the foods you eat and the ways in which they were prepared and having a sense of knowledge of those foods and where they came from and who prepared them and how they were grown from seed to your plate. Medicine is the knowing of our interconnectedness, of being in community, of showing up for people and having them show up for you, of being with your children, of being with your elders, of being situated and held and loved. All that is medicine. Medicine is what we get when we don't feel well, and medicine is what we have to help us stay balanced. And so, yes, medicine can also be, a antibiotic when you are sick or a vaccine to prevent your elders from getting sick or from people from passing different kinds of diseases. Medicine can be showing up with a mask so that people who are immunocompromised can participate in society. So those kinds of things are all different kinds of medicine.
Yeah. I want to ask the same question about what art means to you, knowing that you can go off a free flow as to what art is in every facet of life. But I feel like it is important just to have more of these messages as to what art is. So what flows for you when you think about what is art?
I think art is lived practice. Art is lived practice. It is the act of imagining and sitting and observing and listening, integrating and creating. Um, and it takes so many forms. So for me, when I think of, we are actually going to be creating a wellness space on the farm that will be a clinic. And it will be a place for different kinds of healers to come and work together to take care of the community who are around that farm and people who need to come and get healing. And so when I think about this work, I think to myself, well, this is really more like what I do when I write a song than what I do when I'm like sitting and, planning something as a doctor. It feels like it's an artistic inquiry. What does it mean to decolonize medicine? What does that actually feel like, look like? What is it in practice? That kind of inquiry to me feels like a very creative space. So I see that as, art is decolonizing medicine. It is the work of uncovering and remembering who we are. So that's all those things.
Yeah. So far, I've already heard you speak to what I would consider decolonizing medicine, from bringing frontline workers to building a compost pile to inviting your patients to look at the mountains. How else are you decolonizing medicine, like in the room with folks, whether it be other healers, your patients, knowing there's overlap between those two?
One important part of decolonization work, I feel, is really understanding and situating things in the structures. So social, it's a structural, colonization is a structure, colonialism is a structure. So when we say decolonizing, we're talking about undoing those structures. The first part to undoing a structure is to become aware of it because it's an invisible structure. And so a lot of the work I do in decolonizing medicine in like a personal relationship with patients is basically a kind of political education. So why is it that you are sick in this way? Is it really that you just made bad choices? Or is it these structures around you that never gave you the opportunity to make a good choice? And so when you offer people those understandings, there's a great sense of relief, because it's not about one bringing upon one's own suffering, which is how capitalist cosmologies lead patients to believe. Like, the reason you're poor is because you're lazy. The reason because you have diabetes because you just don't exercise enough. But that's a form of gaslighting when the structures have been designed to make poverty real. Poverty is a fact of this system. It's not an error. It's like built in. It gives people this specter that you're so afraid of that you're going to stay at that shitty job and just keep getting like just keep your nose down. You don't want to end up poor. You don't want to end up unhoused. But in fact, that structure is a part of the system. It's a policy choice. Hunger is a policy choice. So when we talk about decolonizing medicine and we offer that to patients, we're looking at how their illnesses are actually structurally formed, and that's what Raj Patel and I do in our book Inflamed, and we offer that as a medicine itself, and that's deep medicine. So deep medicine is understanding how health is created by systems harmonizing in wellness together, not simply attributes of any individual. You can't have a healthy individual when you've got people being stepped over and swept up like trash on the streets. That is not health. That's an illusion. And that's an illusion that's been sold and bought and sold to advance the capitalist agenda. So if you just think of yourself, and think of your family, and think of your individual atomized reality, you'll be fine. But that's not true when the sky is orange and you can't breathe, right? So like the fact of climate collapse, the fact that colonial capitalism has driven us to this brink where the water is poisoned and the air you can't breathe, and these pandemics will start coming with more and more frequency. These facts show us how deeply interconnected we are, and they are screaming out loud that the cosmology that we have bought into for the last 600 years, that has shaped all of our societies that have been touched by colonial capitalist realities, is false, and it's deadly. And we have to undo it. So that work is political education.
Yeah.
And it's hard
Yeah.
to do. It's hard to do with young people who are used to like Instagram memes, and they'll take so many things out of context, and they get like a fragmented political education, and then they throw their wokeness here and there in their frustration and rage because they actually don't know how to formulate a sentence, a full sentence of context and history. And that is actually a deep problem that needs to be addressed by elders to the young people who are coming in.
Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned Inflamed because I'm still sitting with this book. I've been sitting with it for months because there's so many rich stories about our interconnection, about the system that we're all existing in. So yes, I'll add that in the show notes. It's such an important book. I'm so glad that it's out there as medicine. As a parent, this just emerged as a question for you. How are you navigating that thing that you just talked about with young people having a certain attention span or certain way of educating themselves or miseducating themselves? How are you navigating that with your children?
They don't do screen. My kids don't do much screen time, so they do maybe half an hour a day, and then we watch like a family movie all together, maybe once a week. Maybe they'll get in another movie if they're lucky, if they want to. If we're busy and they're like, oh, we want to watch a movie, but we take them where we go. So we bring them, if we're on the land and we're having these conversations, they're in the periphery, if they're not sitting right in the middle of it. We talk about the things that we're dealing with and working on together. We expect them to be conversant and knowledgeable of these things. So, and we've also homeschooled them the last 3 years during the pandemic. They'll start going to public school in the fall, which will be fascinating to me. It'll be interesting to hear what they think and how it feels and whether they like it, because it's been a very different upbringing for them so far. And I'm sure they'll love the camaraderie of friends. That will be beautiful. And then we'll still take them to the farm and still take them on these, adventures that we do in our learning. But it is, it is important that they're not on social media. They're young. And we're having these conversations now, like, okay, look at the rates of depression of kids on social media. Look at what's happening here. And so then they're like, well, Mom, maybe you shouldn't be on social media. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I shouldn't be on social media.
Wisdom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's good. So it's good. So we're having these conversations as a family. Like, what do we do to protect the development of our young people? We're pretty hardcore though. Like, I'm a doctor, he's a farmer. So like kids are like the kids are around a lot of things that take intense focus and like time, and they're fun. Like being on the farm is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fully embodied, it seems. Yeah. Well, okay, before we close, Rupa, is there anything else you want to say about this intersection? I mean, there's so much. I just also want to name, there's so much that could be said, even just in what you shared. But is there anything else you want to have be known now for now?
Yeah, I would just say that the world needs people who are bridging ways of knowing and are comfortable being in places of knowing that are different than what they're used to, so that they can learn and integrate and be with other people like that. Because the complexities of the problems we're facing with climactic destruction, like instability, and the instability for the safety of humans and many other living animals, um, is of an order that will require a kind of creativity to bring together imagined worlds of better ways of being with the tactical realities and material realities that we're confronted with. That we need we need that. And so I think that it's an important time to insist upon our complexities of passions as young people, especially. Like, don't let anyone reduce you to being a scientist or an artist or this or that. That the multiplicity of who we are is actually the beauty and the needed ingredient right now.
Yeah. Thank you for embodying that.
Thank you for seeing it.